Hey everybody, this is Jacob, and I'm excited to be back and practice doing this some more. Um, I'm actually really excited about today's topic. Um, let me just, which is Glass, M Night Shyamalan's new film, and the ending of a trilogy of sorts. Um, I have a lot of thoughts on this, a lot of feelings, and I'm really excited to talk about it. And I'm just gonna have to hope everything's kind of jumbled up, but I'm just gonna start talking, and hopefully it's all gonna come together. Um, because I feel like I understand pretty well uh, what M Night Shyamalan what he's doing wrong, both in his film Glass and just in his films in general. And we're gonna talk about that. Uh, So there were a couple of, and while I'm talking about it, I'm gonna get into a couple of things. There's a couple of books that I feel are some of the best books that I've read on writing and on story, and one of them is called "Techniques of the Selling Writer" by Dwight V. Swain. It's really awesome, and I reread it occasionally. Um, I go back to it a lot. And another book that was surprisingly good and had some concepts in it that I had never seen anywhere else that I read recently called Story Genius. Let me just look at my phone real quick. Story Genius by Lisa Cron. Um, that one pretty much blew my mind. Some of the concepts in it, um, I've never read anywhere else, I don't believe. And the funny thing about story is it can seem really straightforward and obvious. Like when you talk about like what is a story, that is a much more complicated question than you might think. And someone could ask you, and you could be like, and one answer that you could give is you could say it's like a journey. It's you get from something starts in one place, whether it's like a community or a person, you know, it starts in one place and it gets somewhere else. And you could be well, that's obvious. Like, obviously, that's what a story is. You would be surprised. Um, you would be surprised. People don't always take that into account when they're writing something. There are a lot of concepts that are hard to keep track of when you're trying to create something. And people, as people that are in this society, we are inundated with it, and we think that we understand it really well. But when we try to create, we are not always able to to keep track of all those moving parts, and we're not always aware of all the things that made the things that inspired us to create. What made those things good? We're not always aware of those things. Um, and one of the things uh, in this book that I read recently, Story Genius, that really struck me. Um, and the thing is, a lot of people probably will not agree um, with this. I can imagine that it might be a rather controversial idea, but what she has to say about writing in her book, Lisa Cron, is that um, okay. So a lot of people think about the structure of a story, of a plot, as like it's kind of like Robert McKee said in his book Story. It's a order of events and their design in time. And so people are like, okay, so we have a character, we have an arc, we have a bunch of cool ideas, we just make them run together, and we have a first act, we have a second act, we have a third act, you know, and we come up with ideas for what's going to happen in each part of the story, and then boom, like we have a story. And that's not actually entirely correct. because just because an idea is interesting or exciting doesn't mean that it's going to work for the story that you're creating. And um, and so hopefully I'm representing this accurately. But part of what uh, she talks about in Story Genius is that when you are when you're writing something, what happens is you really have infinite possibilities. You can when you sit down, a lot of people. It's like in Funny Farm, I believe, is the name of the movie with Chevy Chase. He sits down at the typewriter to write his novel. It's going to be his breakout novel, and he types. He's like, "Yeah, I'm excited. I have a great story space. Everything's good to go." Sits down, THE, the, and then just freezes. He doesn't know what to write next because he knew that he was going to write the word the. But after that, it's an infinite world of possibilities. Anything could happen after that point. And and that's what you run into. And particularly when you're trying to stick with a story over the long haul, you start out with certain ideas and then you just sort of have this carousel or like this Rolodex of like, oh, or I could do this, or I could do this, but if I do this, then I have to change this, and if I do this, then I have to change this, and it's just this constant thing. And it's very difficult to settle on one unless you're really really set on certain things. And sometimes being set on an idea can actually make the rest of the story worse, by the way. But unless you're really set on something, um, you're never ever ever going to be able to to stay focused on a certain set of ideas and then know exactly what to do. Because even if you put together a series of events and ideas and concepts and then you're trying to come up with the next thing, there's always something else you can do. You can always add a new concept or idea to it. And so part of the premise of Story Genius is is focusing on the characters and specifically focusing on what their story is, because you can't think about it just in terms of a plot, because a plot is just the events, it's just the way that things happen. And you could argue it like part of it is like the pacing and stuff like that too. It's like the design of the narrative in a more like clinical sense. But a story is like debatably the journey of the individual. It's like the person. So if you start from that point and then you know what that person's story is, why they are the way they are, and what's keeping them from uh, from resolving their own inner conflict and outer conflict and coming to terms with who they are. Um, if you can resolve that, like that's what you're looking for. And so every every time you come up with an idea or a concept or you're pushing the story forward, you have to think, well, what does this do for the main character, for his story? Because before you're thinking that way, it's just an infinite world of possibilities. Oh, like there's a League of Assassins and there's an intergalactic war or whatever. Like you can just keep piling on concepts, or ooh, there's a magic system, this is going on. It's a sci-fi and it's a fantasy and here's why. And like you could just keep throwing things on there. But if they don't do anything for the story, you have to ask, like, is this getting in the way of the story that I'm trying to tell? And once you start to ask those questions, and it seems obvious, but you'd be surprised. And once you start to ask those questions, the rest of it becomes a lot. Um, what you're supposed to do next becomes a lot clearer. Um, it becomes much more clear, and you go from infinite possibilities to like three or four possibilities to a couple different possibilities to I think this is the best way to move forward with the story I'm trying to tell with this character. And then you're not paralyzed and you're not simply gravitating toward the thing that is most self-serving or that you think is the coolest or whatever. You're actually legitimately trying to craft the best story you possibly can. And hopefully I'm holding your attention, and because I know I have not brought up glass at all, and where just about 10 minutes in, but I'm trying to set the groundwork for what I'm trying to gonna say here um because M Night Shyamalan is not very good at endings. Not very good at all. And that may seem contradictory because his big breakout movie, The Sixth Sense, had an ending that blew everybody away. And he's always known for his big twists. And it's one of the big reasons that people liked his early movies, or at least some of them. I suppose the Sixth Sense and The Village had like the biggest twists to them, but he come on, he always likes to have a twist at the end, and Glass is no exception. So where am I? Okay, so M Night Shyamalan, The Sixth Sense. So The Sixth Sense is a good movie, but when you look at the twist that happens at the end, and I'm not even going to say spoiler alert, that the problem is everybody knows how this movie ends, and so it becomes a problem because it's such a cultural thing. So the twist at the end of The Sixth Sense is that the main character is dead and has been dead for the whole movie, and rewatching the movie, it makes you really like go, wow, like oh, like isn't that so interesting that he was dead the whole time, and M Night Shyamalan is such a great director, and he was able to like hide that information in plain sight. Like that's interesting and that's cool, but it doesn't do anything for the main character. When he gets to the end and he receives the information that um, that he is dead, there's it's not like a twist like you would have at the end of the second act leading into the third act or something like that, or toward the end of the film where it's like now that we have this revelation, um, we do something about it. He just goes, oh, I've been dead this whole time, that's interesting, and then he kind of like I suppose moves on into the afterlife or whatever, and uh, that is satisfying in a way. And it's not the worst example of M Night Shyamalan doing this. One of the worst ones is the twist at the end of Unbreakable, because it's at that point it's like it's the type of twist where you have David Dunn, the main character, figures out that um, he figures out about the character who calls himself Mr. Glass. I don't remember this movie in like super well, but I do remember that directly at the end he figures out um, about that he's been manipulated and controlled by this character played by Samuel L. Jackson, and he confronts him, and he ends up being imprisoned. So, but that happens in the last few minutes of the movie, so it doesn't really play into the plot a lot. And that's part of what I'm talking about here is like he comes up with these twists at the end, but they don't really have anything to do with the growth of the character as part of the plot. It's more like an idea he has, and he's like, oh, wouldn't it be really cool if I did this? And then he does it. And honestly, the worst example I've seen of him doing it at all was in Glass. And that is really, it's really sad because overall, I think that he's been coming into his own or it seemed like he was coming back into his own with with Split, because Split was a good movie. It did have some M Night Shyamalanisms in it. There were some things, some bits of dialogue, and a couple scenes that actually quite a bit of dialogue that was off, didn't feel natural, and that's kind of his thing. Sometimes is you end up with this kind of wonky dialogue, uh, even though overall his writing is pretty good. But like it was a good movie, and part of that was James McAvoy's performance and the concept. The fact that it was a stealth sequel was just awesome, and it was a great way to generate buzz for this next movie that he was going to make. Um, but Split didn't have any of that crazy twist stuff. It was, as far as I can remember, it was just about this character um, who had the split personality disorder. um, and it was kind of like a fun little horror movie, and it was really cool. Um, Glass is even worse. It has elements to it that are even worse than what I was describing, because coming up with a cool twist that doesn't serve the characters or the plot, but that you as the writer think is cool, that is one thing. Creating a really self-serving meta narrative is something else. And I can say this partly, like I actually have a degree of experience, personal experience to this, because I did recently write a huge chunk of a novel that I was working on. I have about 17,000 words written, and which is like not, it's not like huge, but it's a considerable amount of work um, toward like a first draft being completed, if you think about it. But the way that I was writing was in a very meta narrative, self serving way. Um, I was writing from like the this isn't completely relevant, but I was writing from like the first person omniscient viewpoint. Like the narrator was like the villain, and he was like a god, and he was like could see everything, and he really liked, and he was like interdimensional, and he liked uh like Western pop culture, like current pop culture, and he would make lots of pop culture references and stuff. And there were lots of anime references in it, like names. Like I called a character like Dakuten, which doesn't really make any sense. And I had a lot of other ideas in it that just like had lots of Star Wars references and a lot of anime stuff going on. I introduced one character as being an edge lord, and I was like, and I like hinted at another character being that was going to be introduced that was going to be like the actual edge lord, and I said you'll know when that person shows up because I'll drop a code word and you'll know that this is the actual edge lord of the story, and that code word is meringue. And it's just like a bunch of it was just like a bunch of fun ideas that were just I was just spitballing them and just writing it out. And as kind of like a fun little project, it's one thing, but it didn't turn out an actual story because I was just writing down whatever ideas I thought were cool, and it wasn't cohesive, and I didn't have a firm understanding of where it was taking the characters. It was a meta narrative that was serving my own purposes, and so was Glass. Glass is, um, and the funny thing about it is like everybody talks about it like it's a meta narrative. For most of the movie, the first half, it doesn't feel that way at all. It feels like an interesting movie about people with superpowers and the implications of having superpowers, and also having other like traumas and conditions that you live with, and just being different and knowing how to deal with it. And the first half of the movie I actually like a lot. Um, it's the last half of the movie where they start to get into the confrontations and everything's going down, that things get weird because M Night Shyamalan. Uh, oh man, most of the movie, people. Okay, I got lost a little bit there. People talk about it being a meta narrative, and I suppose in a way that it is, but not in a way that is nuanced or um, layered, particularly. It's very on the nose. It's in the way, it's a meta narrative in the sense of like characters are telling you to the camera that it's a meta narrative. Because the the phrase comic book is used like, I want to say like 20 times, maybe more in the movie. People talk about comic books a lot. They talk about different types of stories in comic books because they're trying to relate what's happening in the movie uh, to that for various in-universe reasons. And so it, I don't even know if meta narrative is the right way to describe it, because when a character like Glass, the title character, when he's trying to create a situation that mirrors comic books in order to make a statement, um, when he's trying to make that happen, make in order to make a statement about comic books. That's not meta. I don't even know if that's meta narrative. That's just like something in the story. Maybe that is the definition of meta narrative. Let me look this up. What is the definition of meta narrative? A narrative account that experiments with or explores the idea of storytelling, often by drawing attention to its own artificiality. An overarching account or interpretation of events and circumstances that provides a pattern or structure for people's beliefs and gives meaning to their experiences. I'm thinking it's more like the first there. Yeah, I don't know if Glass really. I suppose it kind of is, and I suppose he's making some kind of comment about superhero um, movies, but I don't know what it is. He copies the superhero genre uh, way too much, the current like superhero movie genre in the last half of the movie, and that's what makes it so predictable and uninteresting. Um, and you know what? Spoiler alert! From here on, I'm just gonna say I'm gonna completely spoil the ending of this movie because I really want to get to the point um, that I'm trying to get to here. So M Night Shyamalan had all this time to think about what he was gonna do with these ideas because he talked about doing an Unbreakable sequel for a long time, and then he created Split, and then now we have which was a stealth sequel, and now we have Glass. And what he came up with was not a good conclusion to these characters. Um, so again, spoiler alert: every major character is killed off in this movie. David Dunn dies, Kevin Crumb dies, and Glass, whose actual name I forget, dies. So I can't even remember if they mention who he is in it. That he just calls himself Mr. Glass most of the movie. So so they all die, and Glass his he doesn't. The thing is, he's a really bad guy, and the movie isn't particularly hard on him, and that's part of why the ending isn't satisfying. He has a doting mother who thinks the world of him, and throughout the movie, she's always like being nice to him and being supportive. And at the end, when he gets some people killed as part of an elaborate plan of his, including himself. He gets himself killed as he's dying. His mother is like, "You're such a beautiful boy, and you're wonderful, and I'm so glad." And it's like it would be one thing if there was an arc over the course of that movie where she was trying to understand her son and to come to terms with it, and at the end she did. That would be powerful. That would be interesting. But that wasn't really there. So that was a letdown. Um, Kevin Wendell Crumb. Oh, I'll get to that actually. The split beast guy, played by James McAvoy. Let's talk about David Dunn first. David Dunn. Someone said this to me recently. David Dunn's death had about as much dramatic impact as if he had slipped, fallen into a swimming pool, and drowned. And that is correct. At the end of the film, uh, he's grabbed by, I believe they're police officers. They grab him. It's security or police officers. I'm pretty sure they're the police. They grab him and they shove him into a body of water, like a tiny little puddle. But he's because David Dunn is weak to water, he can't get free, and they just drown him. Which sounds really anticlimactic and ironic and interesting, but it's not because as he's dying, the villain of the story, the woman who's holding them in the insane asylum, like reaches out and grabs his hand and looks at him and is like and has like a little heart to heart with him, and it's all about setting up this organization that goes around and tries to convince people with powers that they don't actually have powers in order to contain those abilities. He's trying to set up for a bunch more stories, and that's what he's doing with it. So so it's really like not dramatic or climactic or interesting or anything. It's just really, really sad, weird the way that he drowns to death, particularly because he doesn't have a whole lot of growth or much of an arc in the film in general. But anyway, he gets drowned to death. And then there's Kevin Wendell Crumb, who is the guy with all the personalities, including the Beast. Um, so he Kevin is the real him, who is one of the personalities who likes to stay quote unquote away from the light, which means he doesn't like to actually take over his own body and like be present as a personality. He likes to let his other personalities take control. And at the end of the film, he's convinced to come out and be awake for a while, right as he's dying because he gets shot by the police. So that happens, and that's actually one of the more satisfying arcs. I would say that of the three, his is the best, and the most. It's like the most dynamic of the three. But the problem, if you could even call David Dunn's death the end of an arc, but the problem with Kevin's death is that he he gets this you know he gets back to the light, but he doesn't do anything with it. He doesn't defy the beast. He doesn't try to rectify his actions in any way. He simply dies, and that's not that compelling, to be honest. I just don't find that interesting. Yeah, the twist of the movie is that Glass was basically working the whole time to get lots of video footage taken of them using their abilities. So the Beast, particularly the Beast and David Dunn, uh, so that he could leak the footage out, and everybody would know that there are people with superpowers. That was his plan. And the last, I want to say like 10 minutes of the movie is the villain, the doctor who's running the insane asylum, basically having that revelation and going back and talking with their organization. It's just a bunch of time spent on what it looks like he wants to be this superhero universe that he's creating. That's what he's spending time on. And if that isn't what it is, if he's not actually trying to create a superhero universe, then why spend all this time on this and not the characters and like an actually satisfying ending? I have no idea. And the movie ends with uh, three people, including Mr. Glass's mom and David Dunn's son. All three of them are, and the chick from Split, I forget her name. All three of them are holding hands, and they're excited that the footage got leaked because they have some kind of connection for some reason. I'm not really sure what that is. Didn't really have a sense that from it felt so resolved. David Dunn's son is actually pretty dynamic and interesting in the movie, but I didn't have a sense. The ending was so resolved. I didn't have a sense that the son wanted to take things further and that he had plans and that there was stuff he wanted to do after the movie was over. I did not have that sense at all. It just felt too resolved, too open and shut. Um, yeah, I don't know. And like I was trying to get to, it's almost like M. Night Shyamalan, he was fixated on this idea of talking about comment coming up with a commentary about current superhero movies and talking about, I guess he just wanted to come up with this idea for an organization, and he wanted to expand on the universe and do all of that. So but he put that ahead of having an actually really good story. And It's a real shame. I know I skipped over another point because I was going to talk about the ending of The Village as well. Because earlier I was talking about M. Night Shyamalan's endings. And the thing about The Village was that it has a lot of really interesting drama and like character stuff and a lot of you know interesting moments when you're basically as part of the dynamics of the community that the village takes place in. And the twist at the end doesn't really have anything to do with the growth of those characters. It's simply it's like shocking and it's kind of interesting, but it's mostly like a gotcha moment, and that's not very compelling at all to me. Um, yeah, what else? I feel like there's more I could say about. I mean, there's always more I could say about Glass, and more I could say about M. Night Shyamalan. The thing is, I like him as a filmmaker. Um, in a lot of ways, I think that the I like the twist at the end of Signs, and I really like the movie Signs because the twist at the end was a piece of information and uh, an arc moment for the characters where they came to terms with their past and they figured out what to do about it, and then they acted, and that's what made it compelling, and that's what made it a story. But a lot of his endings aren't like that. Like the ending of Unbreakable is just a little twist that doesn't really have a whole lot to do with the plot overall in terms of like arcs and like what people are doing. I don't think David Dunn figuring out about Glass at the end of Unbreakable contributes to his arc particularly. I don't think it's very instrumental in the rest of the plot. Um, and same with the Sixth Sense. The fact that he's dead doesn't have a whole lot to do with the rest of the plot. Um, it's just kind of a way to like answer questions and then let him go in the last few seconds of the movie. Um, just like a little gotcha moment. And then Lady in the Water to me is just a mess. And the less said about Avatar The Last Airbender, the better. Just in general. I've never seen The Happening. I don't want to see The Happening. I've seen too many clips at this point. I feel like I've seen the whole movie. And the clips I have seen anyway are just absolutely terrifyingly bad. Um, I've heard that The Visit is in terms of cinematography is pretty interesting. Um, I have not seen it. I'm not particularly interested in seeing it, and that's the thing. Like, I don't think he's a bad director. I think that um, he has a vision, and it's possible that he has kind of a big head. Uh, there's an interview um, that he had after he made Avatar: The Last Airbender, where someone was asking him his about making the Last Airbender and like if he was trying to make something more mainstream to like appeal to a mainstream audience, and he said that he if he thought that way, he would literally kill himself, and that his movies are amazing, and there's like film schools in Europe where they dissect The Happening and stuff like that. And he was just really like, so he seems like a pretty cocky guy. He has kind of a big head. He thinks his movies are pretty amazing. So I think that with the kind of And supposedly, when he was first coming out with his first few breakout movies, people were calling him the next Spielberg. So I think he just kind of has a big head, and it seems like he's surrounded by people who probably just let him do what he wants to do. They don't really push back against his ideas. Kind of makes me think of like George Lucas when he was making the prequels. I imagine that's some of what's going on. But um, overall, I don't think he's a bad director. But uh, the issues with his movies are very apparent and they're very consistent. So it's getting to the point where it doesn't seem like he's really overcoming those things because like you as a creator, you know, you're never going to be you don't start out perfect and you don't as anyone could probably tell from watching this video obviously, you're not going to start out with something that's going to be top notch immediately. There's a big learning curve. Um, but what we're seeing with a lot of M Night Shyamalan stuff is he's not getting better; he's getting worse. So that's the trend that we've mostly seen. So uh, it's really a lot of the as a creator, what it comes down to is like the ability to improve. Like that's all it really is. Like you're always going to fail and you're always going to make stuff that doesn't quite match up, but you want to try and improve. So failure is all a part of the process. So um, yeah, so I think I got really off track a couple of times, and hopefully I was pretty coherent. This one clocked out being kind of long. We're coming up on 37. Well, we're more than 37 minutes in. Um, but hopefully, I kept things fairly. Hopefully, that was coherent and made sense. So anyway, gonna keep trying this. Trying to figure out what to talk about next. Um, yeah, this was fun, and I'll talk to you guys later.